This young man is unconscious but alive, although how, a mystery. At 2 a.m. this morning, this house in Gaza City was hit by the Israelis. Ramaz Abu Nasser has just dug his brother out of the rubble.
We kept removing the debris. I saw my brother. Here's his blood. He was covered in debris. He started screaming. My heart was cut to pieces and I started crying. I cried so much as I dug for him.
The family inside had left the giant urban refugee camp in Jabalia, northeast of the city, to come here. The IDF had told people to leave Jabalia as their operation in that neighbourhood intensifies. The IDF's stated aim to root out Hamas. Rescue workers' objectives: dig out children. These people, homeless again, will most likely join the queues for humanitarian aid, like this one in Khan Yunis, further south. Yesterday, a letter to the Israeli government from the US became public. The thrust of it: the US believes that Israel is not only not doing enough by way of getting aid to Gaza, it's obstructing it. And if Israel doesn't sort that out, US military aid could be withheld. A section of the US letter says that Israel is denying or impeding nearly 90% of humanitarian movement between northern and southern Gaza in September. It acknowledges an improvement earlier this year, but says that since then, the amount of aid has dropped by more than 50%. The amount of assistance entering Gaza in September, last month, was the lowest of any month during the past year. Journalists aren't allowed into Gaza. We got as close as we could today on the Israeli border. Plumes of smoke and the sounds of fighting from the north of the Strip. The Biden administration has been very frustrated with the Israelis around their inability or unwillingness to deliver a sufficient level of humanitarian aid to Gaza for some time now. This letter is important because it very publicly expresses that discontent, but will it make any difference? In theory, Israel now has 30 days to improve its performance in terms of humanitarian aid delivery, and if it doesn't do that in that period, the US has the option to withdraw military aid. That's the theory. In practice, though, there is very little appetite in Washington for that to happen. And also that 30-day period, smack bang in the middle of it, the US presidential election, where everything could change. After 2 weeks of no aid into Gaza, yesterday it started again through the Erez crossing, although slowly, and it's complicated. Trucks that get through these gates are examined and unloaded at a staging area inside. Yesterday, 28 trucks got in to the platform, but only 12 got through to Gaza. Is that correct?
It's correct.
Yeah. And then before that, there was nothing, basically.
From the 1st of October till yesterday, there were not a single food that entered.
Today, the Israelis said 50 trucks crossed, which is true. But the WFP told us that only 14 truckloads got through the staging area itself to be actually distributed inside Gaza today. The Israelis blame Hamas for delays delivering aid. Today, the US, though, piled even more public pressure on Israel. The US ambassador to the UN said that the world is watching to ensure that Israel's operation in northern Gaza doesn't amount to a policy of leave or starve.
Well, here in the Commons, Sir Keir Starmer called on Israel to allow much more aid into Gaza to alleviate what he said was the dire humanitarian situation. The Prime Minister also said he was looking at imposing sanctions against 2 Israeli ministers from far-right ultra-nationalist parties. Israel's Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has suggested that starving civilians in Gaza might be justified, while the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, described violent settlers on the West Bank as heroes.
We are looking at that because they're obviously abhorrent comments, as he rightly says, along with other really concerning activity in the West Bank, but also across the region. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire. The death toll has surpassed 42,000, and access to basic services is becoming much harder. And Israel must take all possible steps to avoid civilian casualties, to allow aid into Gaza in much greater volume.
Well, in Lebanon, at least 25 people were killed in continued Israeli airstrikes across the south. Let's get the latest from our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, who joins us from Beirut. Lindsay.
Christian, there is a sense tonight that the diplomatic pressure on Israel is going up a notch. It is increasing. At that UN Security Council meeting, the US ambassador used very different language. She said the politics of starvation was horrific and unacceptable. She talked about potential breaches of both US and international law. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is pushing once again for a day after policy. What is going to happen at the end of this war in Gaza? How is it going to be run? That is something that Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to like. And then here in Lebanon. Now, there is still fighting going on that southern border here. Hezbollah is still firing into Israel. But there were widespread Israeli strikes overnight and through today. And the White House press secretary has just said that the US is against airstrikes on densely populated suburbs of Beirut. Well, there were 2 such airstrikes overnight. We don't yet know how many people were killed. And all across the country, more strikes. It's not just people being killed. It's not just that more than 1.2 million people have fled their homes in Lebanon. It's that these strikes, this war, is tearing this society apart. Israeli soldiers laid charges in what they say is terrorist infrastructure. To the Lebanese who lived in the village of Mahbib, there is nothing to cheer. Nor in the southern town of Nabatea, where today the mayor and at least 15 others were killed in Israeli airstrikes. The Israeli Prime Minister says Israel has created an opportunity for Lebanese to take their country back from Hezbollah, like the American officer in Vietnam who said they destroyed the town in order to save it. This morning, we drove up the hill north from Beirut to the village of Maisra. The view from the house near the top must have been lovely before it was hit by an airstrike on Sunday. It was the home of a prominent Shiite family, recently joined by relatives fleeing the south. The bomb, which fell at 2:15 in the afternoon, killed 16.
The pressure of the bomb, he make my wife and my niece move 4 meters away.
Right.
Boom.
One of the neighbours appeared in his pajamas, still in shock, still trying to make sense of what happened. So what do you feel now?
Miserable, actually.
Miserable.
Yeah, every day in the morning I drink coffee with him, with his family. I eat food, you know. But this is very bad. It's very bad for everybody. All the houses over here are destroyed. It's my house, it's my flowers. I put flowers over here. I give them water every day. What am I gonna do? Thanks God.
Why do you think they targeted this house, this village?
Probably they think they over here, the Hezbollah.
They think there's Hezbollah here.
Probably. You ask me, I tell you probably.
Local Hezbollah officials have turned the ruins into a political shrine. The neighbours don't know exactly who was visiting, but say the man of the house was not a fighter.
You know, I believe in my heart. He's a very clean person. His kids, clean persons. But why? Probably wrong information. Mm. But, you know, this is Israel. Israel, big country, and they have, you know, smart people over there. They know technology, you know. It's no way they make it wrong.
They have a lot of intelligence.
Yes, of course. You know, AI right now, they invent the AI, right? So they smart. If you make it wrong, I believe they don't make wrong.
In this village, Christians live alongside Shiites. Until now, that hasn't been a problem, but tensions are rising. The bomb also injured some members of a neighbouring Christian family. Violette, whose elbow was broken by shrapnel, is full of love for her great niece, a trainee nurse.
She's saying that I didn't leave her.
They've lived in this beautiful place for more than 40 years. Do you think that this is causing problems between the different communities?
Yeah, I mean here there's a church and there's a mosque next to each other, you know. I hope not, you know. I hope this war doesn't lead to conflicts. I hope not.
But do you fear it might?
You know, there's always this fear, but you know, we've lived with each other for so long, so I hope not. Yeah.
Injured by a bomb that wasn't meant for them. No one here sees Israeli strikes as a way to remake Lebanon, more that their shrapnel might tear the country apart.
Well, joining me now from Washington is former US Army Major Harrison Mann. He resigned in the summer over his deep misgivings for US support for Israel during its Gaza campaign. Thanks for joining us. When you look at today's threat from the State Department and Defense Secretary, how does it square with the reality of how the defense and intelligence community in America is knitted into Israeli policy?
Yeah, thank you. And first, I think we should rephrase this. I did not read that letter and absorb that it was a threat. I think that's how it's been reported, and we've seen headlines that went to the extent of saying Biden administration threatens an arms embargo. But the actual language of the letter says that the United States may consider following its own laws if Israel does not clean up its act in 30 days. So I want to be clear first that there is no commitment in that letter or in the statements of the Biden-Harris administration that the United States will actually change its policy towards Israel if Israel does not implement the recommendations in that letter. I think it's still a significant document, not because it's necessarily going to change the level of U.S. support for Israel right now, but because it's a really unusually explicit record of the administration's commitment both to overcoming or breaking U.S. law to continue arming Israel, and also to the amount of awareness that they've had about how Israel is impeding U.S. aid, starving civilians. There's a very detailed list of demands and recommendations in the letter, and you can really only make those if you understand all of the ways that Israel is in fact impeding aid. But I don't think that threat really squares with another big decision the administration made this week, which was deploying 100 U.S. soldiers with the THAAD air defense battery to Israel. So I don't think it really represents a significant intention to change our level of support.
So having worked in defense intelligence, is the reality that American support for Israel is effectively unconditional?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I can tell you from October, when I started thinking about quitting, we saw in the intel community, we would accept similar language that the Department of Defense used, which was we will accept the credible assurances of the Israeli government that our arms, or in my case, our intelligence support, is not going to contribute to war crimes or violations of international humanitarian law. And the policy of accepting their credible assurances has not changed to date, despite many threats that we might actually do something about it. So this letter appears to be an attempt to say the administration is finally not going to take Israel's word for it, but it would be the first time that they actually follow through on that
Are you
policy.
the lone individual, the exception that proves the rule? I mean, or are there other people like you that you came across who share misgivings about US policy?
No, there's an extremely large, at least plurality of people within defense and foreign policy and national security circles who feel the same way. When I resigned, I discovered there's a lot of people in my office at DIA who felt the same way. And I think actually the existence of this letter indicates that there are people who want this information to get out. Because while it may be intended to placate some critics, it's also quite damning of the Biden-Harris administration.
Now, when you look at the diplomatic plans, though, that the US seems to be supporting, which essentially are a Israeli Emirati plan that the Palestinian Authority just kind of reject and get furious about. I mean, are these regarded as serious diplomatic initiatives, or are they just something to talk about?
Yeah, these day after plans started circulating, and because of my job, I was able to see them in October, in November of last year, and they've never really quite been in touch with reality. I think the Emirates sees them as a great way to score points with the administration by promising to be helpful, but they know it's never going to be implemented. How are you going to have additional foreign soldiers in Gaza while Hamas still exists? And we've seen right now Israel cannot fully defeat Hamas. So do we really think the UAE is signing up to have its soldiers fight or police Hamas? I doubt it, and I doubt that the Emirati leadership intends that either. I would note that this most recent plan is missing some of the original partners for this kind of joint Arab peace force. It used to have Morocco, it used to have Saudi Arabia, and I think even Egypt was discussed. So it does signal a certain lack of interest or lack of hope in cooperating with the U.S. on this from other traditional Arab partners.
Harrison Mann, thank you very much for your time.